Hey, brilliant entrepreneurs, it's Tash Corbin here, and welcome to another episode of the Heart-Centered Business Podcast. This is episode number 238, which means all the relevant links and show notes are over at tashcorbin.com/238. Now, this is not really a marketing topic per se, but running a group of 33,000 women online, I see some things, and this is a conversation I'd love for us to continue over in the Heart-Centered Soul-Driven Entrepreneurs group, because it is a pattern and trend that I see, and I can see it happening in lots of different ways, and I wanted us to open up this conversation. The conversation is about dripping with disdain, and a big shout out to Vampire Weekend and their song Oxford Comma for that gorgeous description, dripping with disdain. It's like such a powerful and emotive phrase, and I just love it. It's 3 words put together so perfectly. Anyway, dripping with disdain, and that can be about your industry or your audience. And I thought that this particular podcast episode could be about how, by shining a light on some of that disdain that we might have for our industry or our audience, we can start to detox ourselves from the judgment that we might feel towards others. So let's jump into this episode. It's going to be a bit of a meandering conversation, but I've got 8 really powerful examples for you where it might be so helpful to shine a light on where this behavior, even if it's not outwardly facing, it's just inward thoughts, can show up, and how it is actually stopping you from growth in your business. So let's dive into that. I'm Tash Corbin, and this is the Heart-Centered Business Podcast. So as you might have picked up from my introduction to this episode, it's not necessarily about, fix this and your business will grow, or do this and you will get more clients, or whatever it might be. But I do think it's really important for us to pay attention to our thoughts and feelings, especially as they relate to our industry and as they relate to our audience and potential clients. For me, that's where the biggest personal development and growth journeys have happened for me. And I know myself, there are still areas where I can have some pop-up thoughts that aren't necessarily helpful, but I don't ignore them. I pay attention to them because they show me where I need to be changing my behavior, showing up more authentically, or sometimes it's highlighting something in my industry or something for my audience that I need to step up and talk about and change. And so by ignoring those things, I end up keeping myself small or just judging quietly and not necessarily having the conversation. Whereas if I bring those things to the fore, I can address them. So here are some examples, and I'm going to start with industry, and then I'm going to talk about audience. So here are some examples of places and conversations that I've heard where people have disdain for their industry. And number 1 is, this entire online business world is a giant pyramid scheme. Have you heard it? Have you thought it? Have you said it out loud? Have you talked about that as a worry with your coach or mentor? I know that this conversation pops up again and again in the Heart-Centered community. It pops up again and again in the Takeoff program. I totally understand where it's coming from, and I understand that some of those concerns that people have are very valid. I know of coaches who charge $15,000 to teach people how to charge $15,000 to teach people how to charge $15,000. I totally have seen that as a model of business. And has there been any material training or development or mentoring in actually changing people's lives for that $15,000? Or is it just finding more people to charge $15,000 to learn how to charge $15,000? Who knows, right? So I understand that we can see some of these examples and feel quite judgmental about, well, that's what the whole industry really is in a nutshell. And if we think that we're doing any different, we're actually kidding ourselves. And I've had someone say to that to me in a VIP client call. And I totally understand why it can be a frustration and a fear. If it is a giant pyramid scheme and we just can't see it and we're contributing to it, then aren't we culpable in this entire scheme thing? And shouldn't we opt out of it? So the first thing I want to say to that is, number one, it's not all of the industry. I have worked with so many amazing people who have completely changed my life, not just in the way that I grow my business, but also in the way that I serve my clients and in my life outside of my business as well. And I absolutely love and adore the training and support and development that I have received from most of the people that I've worked with. And so a great way to unhook yourself from this thought, if it's something that keeps popping up for you, is to, number one, realize that it's not all of it. Number two, look at the ways where you have been helped outside of the way that you make money. So are there things that you have learned? Are there changes that you've made? Do you show up differently as a result of being in this industry? And therefore, could that change be something beyond being part of the paying this much to learn how to sell this much, to learn how to sell this much, to learn, you know what I mean? So that's definitely a second way that you can really unhook yourself from that belief. And then the third one is to see this as an opportunity. So I know for myself that when people want to work with me, they're working with me because they see that I am not just in that pyramid type model. They see that a lot of my clients don't teach people how to make money. My clients teach people how to look after their health and well-being, how to dial up their intuition, how to feng shui their home to improve their relationships, how to attract their soulmate. So one of the big things for me when I am working with a mentor or coach is to look at, do their clients do exactly what they do, or do their clients work in other ways and impact people's lives in other ways as well? So it's not the entire industry, and there is an opportunity for you to differentiate yourself simply by the fact that you're not part of that pyramid scheme. You can express your value proposition beyond, I teach you exactly the thing that I learned, which was how to sell something that doesn't actually change people's lives, right? So you can absolutely opt out of that. And where you are judging others for participating in that pyramid scheme, then in most cases, whenever I am feeling that like, oh, that's a giant pyramid scheme, what it's doing is highlighting for me my fear that maybe I'm in that. And so it is just this beautiful reminder to me that I need to be conscious of how I show up online. I need to be conscious of the contribution I'm making to the world. And I want to be 100% confident with my business that it isn't a giant pyramid scheme. So what do I need to change, adjust, or focus on in order for that to be true? And that's how I deal with it. So that's number one. Number two, and this one has particularly come up this year, the leaders of my industry are horrid. Right? And this has come up a lot with Black Lives Matter, with a lot of white privilege and a lot of justification of white privilege, white fragility, you know, all of those things that have really come to the fore, particularly this year, and seeing industry leaders topple, right? I've seen many people who I would have seen as leaders in my industry have a very hard and fast fall because they were unwilling to stop and listen and do the self-reflection and pay attention and acknowledge their own internalized racism, systemic racism, white privilege, white supremacy. And it could be very easy to say, well, because they are horrible, or they didn't deal with it, or they are the leaders of this thing, and look at what they're saying, I'm opting out altogether. And I think that that's a really big mistake, because what I have also seen, especially this year, is the lifting of amazing voices and the demand at the client level for this to be addressed, and people are voting with their wallets. And I have been able to hear from and see so many more amazing Black women who run brilliant multi-million-dollar businesses. I have moved from working with someone who had some problematic responses to Black Lives Matter, and I immediately cancelled my membership in their program and went and joined a different one. And so a great example of this and a different way to look at it would be, let's say you wanted to sell swimwear. You were in the swimwear industry, and the leading brands in your industry do not include body diverse models, do not include racially diverse people. They do not have inclusive sizing. They do not have inclusive styling. They do not have inclusive anything, right? The leaders in the swimwear industry have mostly white, mostly skinny, mostly very tanned and problematic from a sun-safe perspective models. And you wanted to sell swimwear, but looking at the leaders in your industry, it would be easy to say, well, to succeed in this industry, I need to do that, and I'm not willing to do it, so I'm opting out. But that's not actually the case. You wouldn't opt out of that industry. You would stand up for what you want to see in that industry, and you would have that inclusivity and that diversity as part of your business model. And that would be a point of difference for you. And that would ultimately end up being an advantage for you, especially as more and more people are no longer willing to tolerate silence on Black Lives Matter, silence on white supremacy and white fragility and racism. And it's not just in that one space, it's in many, many spaces. I myself saw that all of the leaders that I could see in my industry were talking about the 4 a.m. club, and they were talking about hustling and wanting it harder, and they were talking about dialing up people's pain and fear in the sales process because you can totally fix them later when they buy from you. And I didn't want to do any of that. But if I had completely opted out of the entire industry because the people that I saw who were leading in that industry had problematic behaviors and beliefs that I didn't agree with, then all of the thousands of women that I've now supported to grow their businesses and market in a way that is completely aligned with their values and doesn't cause triggering of trauma or dialing up people's pain points in the sales process, all of those thousands of women would have missed out, and they'd probably be following the industry leaders and feeling the same as I did 7 years ago. So when it comes to looking at your industry, notice where you're feeling that disdain for the leadership, where you're feeling that judgment of the way that other people are behaving. And instead of just expressing that disdain and judgment and doing nothing about it, turn it into something that's actually helpful and useful for your audience. So you will notice that when I talk about the problematic behaviors in terms of sales processes in my business, I don't just throw out disdain and judgment. I instead break it down to this specific strategy is not aligned with my values because of this, and this is what it does to people, and I'm not willing to do that. And so if you aren't willing to do that either, here's what I do. And you might like to try to do this way as well. So I'm not just throwing out, criticism and judgment of the leaders in my industry. I am instead focusing on what behaviors specifically am I not happy with, why am I not happy with them, and what am I doing instead, and how could you do that too? So instead of throwing out the judgment, I'm actually being part of the solution. And you have the opportunity to do that as well. So that's number 2, leaders, the issues with the leadership. Number 3, copycats. So I've had many conversations in particular in the last couple of months where people are saying, I'm not going to put anything out online because every time I do, this person just does the carbon copy of what I'm doing 3 days later, and she shouldn't get to have free content written for her by me. Or I had someone who I was talking to, and they'd created a program, they'd given it a specific name, they started telling everyone about that name, and then someone else who they saw as a peer came out with a program, unbuilt, but started selling it with the exact same name. And she was like, she clearly just copied the name and just wanted to get in with that name first. And there's lots of that. I talked about a particular product that I was thinking about doing and a URL that I was thinking about buying and I talked about it on a Facebook Live earlier this year. And 3 days after I did that Facebook Live, someone else bought that URL and put it instantly up for sale for $5,000. Now, the URL was something very specific to something that I talk about very specifically. And it seems like a coincidence. It seems like it could be very likely that someone watched that video and went and bought that domain name. But does that mean I'm not going to do anything? Does that mean I just give up? Does that mean the entire industry is just full of copycats? What are you focusing on? Where are you putting your attention if you're constantly looking to find who is copying me? So what I ended up doing was just completely moving in a different direction with a different name for the same concept. And I felt like it ended up being better anyway. So it's no drama. I could spend my time and attention getting really upset and angry about that, or I could spend my time and attention on building this program. You can spend your time and attention looking for people who've copied you, or you can block those people and get on with your life, or accept that there's a lot of coincidence and we all kind of end up sounding the same when we're all talking to the same audiences, or just focus on your audience instead of focusing on your peers. And I also think whenever the copycat issue comes up, the judgment stuff comes out huge, right? Like it's like it's an affront to you. It's an insult. It's, you're making it mean so many different things. And at the end of the day, for me, I have so much compassion for someone who feels that they need to copy my things and my work, because to me it says like that person is really low in self-esteem. That person is really struggling to feel confident in their own content, in coming up with their own concepts, in coming up with their own way of talking about things. If they're constantly resharing or modeling my work in their work, then I mean it's not necessarily an insult. It's very flattering, but also it says more about that person than it does about me. And if I put all my energy and attention on stopping that person, what is the opportunity cost of that? And so for me, like, I don't judge someone who copies me. I don't judge someone who copies someone else. I understand what it feels like to feel like you desperately need to create something and you have no idea what to say and how stuck that can feel. And if the thing that gets that person unstuck is regurgitating something that you've done, then like power to them. Like let's all help each other. A rising tide lifts all ships. I think when you live in a world where you see that resources are finite, clients are finite, success is finite, it can be really easy to be upset by that. And of course I'm not saying like let everyone copy everyone and let's all regurgitate the same information. There are legal protections, there are ways that you can address it, but at the end of the day, is it even worth doing some of those things? And I had a conversation with someone in particular and they said, this girl, she's following me, she follows my page, she likes every one of my posts, and she then does a post that's a very similar topic 3 or 4 days after mine. I was like, block her. If it really upsets you that much, block her. Well, I don't want to block her. She says that she's a fan. Okay, we'll have a conversation about it. Well, we've sort of talked about it and she just said it was because we were really aligned. I was like, okay, we'll take legal action. Oh, well, I don't want to take legal action. I was like, well, they're your options. The other option is stop focusing on her and stop checking whether she's copying you. Why don't you just take her out of your newsfeed if you're not willing to take you out of hers? So, I think sometimes we prefer to stay in the space of feeling superior or feeling like we're better than someone than actually addressing the challenge that we think we're facing. That's all I'll say on that one. I do have a whole episode about copycats too, by the way. And then the final industry one that I think can be particularly difficult for people who are new to social media or who struggle with social media is this feeling that the internet's already too noisy and I'm just contributing to this noise and I don't want to be part of it. I don't want to be part of the noise on the internet. And so to that, I would say, one, like, yes, everyone is trying to share their content and we all want to speak to our audiences and all those sorts of things. But at the end of the day, your audience is going to resonate with your message. And just because you might feel like it's a busy space to be speaking into doesn't mean that people aren't sitting there waiting to hear from you. And I know for myself, there are several people that I've found on social media where I felt like no one was talking about the thing I needed people to be talking about. And even when I Googled, I couldn't find anything. And then people start, when I finally find someone, it's like, yes, finally someone is having this conversation. I really want to learn this stuff. And the noise of the internet didn't get in the way. It was just that no one was having that conversation as far as I could find. And so I understand the fear that, you're just contributing to the noise of the internet, but think about your content and your posts as an oasis for your ideal client. You don't need to participate in the trying to yell over each other. I've got a great example, actually. This just came to me. I went to this amazing market over the weekend and there were all of these stalls and, it's been a bit quiet on the markets front because of COVID and all those sorts of things. Bit of a warm up to Christmas type event. And there was this one row of market stalls, and in this row of market stalls, many of the stall holders were standing in front of their market stall. And I love when I go to markets just kind of browsing, right? I don't need to have conversations with every single person. And as I walked through this section, I was assaulted by noise, right? I had, hey, do you need this? Come and try this out, blah, 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 right? You just had all this people talking at you. And there was this beautiful, beautiful lady. She would have been at least in her 60s, if not older. And she had these beautiful handcrafted beads and buttons and jewelry and decorative things. It was just really beautiful. And she was just sitting there quietly behind her stall. And I just naturally made a beeline to her stall. I just didn't want to deal with the noise, right? I just wanted to make a beeline to her stall, and I was looking at her things, and she just sat there quietly, and I said, wow, did you make these? She said, yeah, I make these, just keeping myself busy. Started during lockdown, and we had this most amazing conversation, and she wasn't loud, right? You don't need to yell over everyone else to be successful online. You can just be this beautiful oasis of really useful information for your audience. You can be an oasis of calm confidence. It was the calmly, quietly confident people at that market that I spent the most time engaged with because I didn't want to be yelled at by mostly dudes. I didn't want to know that his beef jerky was best beef jerky in all of Southland. I didn't need to know how many different flavors of bath bombs that other guy had. I honestly didn't need the yelling at me. It was the quiet, calm, confident stall holders that didn't need to get out and pitch to me in desperation that I was really drawn to. So you can show up on the internet in that way as well, but you still need to show up. So instead of being worried or judgmental about everyone yelling over everyone and the internet's really noisy, how can you show up in a way that reflects what you want to show up as and how you want to be seen and how you want to contribute to what's on the internet? You don't have to contribute noise, you can contribute calm. So they are the 4 big judgments I see of the industries that we might belong to. It's a pyramid scheme, leadership, copycats, and the internet is already noisy. And then the other side of this conversation is where I see disdain for people's audience. And this one I really don't get, but I see it come up often. People get really frustrated with their audience. So I have an example from the Heart Centre community, and this was many, many, many moons ago, and I don't want to get into who it was or anything like that, but it was such a great example for me of not seeing the opportunity with your audience. I used to every 3 or 4 months do a post in the Heart Centre group asking people what their astrology sign was and what's your favorite thing about being that sign. And there was someone who was a very experienced astrologer who saw that this post was particularly problematic. There was one time where this post had 700 people had commented, and people, all the Leos, were teaming up with each other going, oh my God, I'm a Leo too, and I love this about us, and da-da-da, right? And all these people having this amazing conversation. It was one of the most amazing posts that I'd ever done in the group. And one time it really took off, and there were all of these comments. And this very experienced astrologer saw people making assumptions about their sign or talking about their astrology in ways that she, as an experienced for multiple decades astrologer, could see was wrong. They were wrong. And not only did she comment on the post saying, this post is a complete sham, it's a waste of time, none of you know what you're talking about. If you had the experience that I had with astrology, you would know that that's just ridiculous and the way that the question was posed is wrong. She also reached out to me and told me that I should take the post down because it was so problematic, that people shouldn't be talking about their astrological signs if they weren't actually informed about what it meant and informed properly about what it meant. And then she went and commented, anyone who commented on the post, she went and commented back and told them why they were wrong about themselves, why they were wrong about their sign. Some people had put comments up about saying, oh my gosh, if you don't know what your sign is about, I would happily share with you, just get in touch. And we had some astrologers adding extra things and adding extra statements. I loved it, right? The astrologers were having a field day. Everyone was having a great conversation. It was amazing. And this person went through and commented and told everyone why they were wrong. Now, you could choose to see that this conversation about astrology was an affront, which is how she chose to see it, or you could see that this conversation about astrology was an opportunity. And the only difference as to whether you see it as an affront or whether you see it as an opportunity is your perspective. Your perspective is the only difference. Now, not only did I not take that post down because I loved the conversation that was happening, but I also then, whenever that it came up again in one of my suggested posts, because I have a content plan for the group of suggested things that we could have conversation about. Oh, we haven't talked about this in a while. And it came up, and the last 3 times that it's come up, I haven't done it. I haven't put that post up there. If this person had seen it as an opportunity and engaged in it in a really beautiful way, without the disdain and without the judgment of their audience, 90% of the people on that post were their ideal client, right? They were semi-informed about astrology, but loved talking about it. That's an opportunity. Instead of seeing it as an opportunity, saw it as an affront and shut the conversation down, upset a lot of people in the comments, and then now hasn't had the opportunity for that conversation to be reinvigorated in the group since. And if that person had simply seen it as an opportunity, had, maybe given some clarification about, there's more to it, and if you really want to know what it's like and what it means for you and how this ties into your business or whatever it might be, I would happily, I've got a special on at the moment, get in touch. Instead of doing that, just chose to treat the audience with disdain and contempt and judgment. And it's such a shame. It is such a shame that that was a missed opportunity. Now, I know that this is a really extreme example, but I see it pop up all the time where someone asks a question and they're basically screaming at you that they are your ideal client because they don't quite understand how to ask the question properly. And instead of being met with love and compassion and understanding, they are met with judgment and disdain and completely put off the whole idea. This happened to me. I joined a vegan group, and this is many, many years ago, and I asked a few questions about veganism, and I was basically told, by asking that question, you are telling us that you're not actually a proper vegan, and so please go away. And they didn't say it in a nice term like that. And it was so bizarre to me because it was full of vegan entrepreneurs who could have helped me with understanding some things about veganism. And instead, I got completely pooped on in asking that question. And I see this come up over and over again. People judging and having disdain for their audience asking questions that indicates they're probably ripe to have a conversation with you about this. And they might actually either be really ready to work with you or just before the tipping point of being ready to work with you. So I just wanted to bring that one up because I think that it can be very easy for us to jump to conclusions about why someone's asked a question or what they're saying or why they're saying it. But at the end of the day, are you looking at that audience conversation as an affront or as an opportunity? So that was number one. Number two, And I hear this one a lot, like, my audience will waste money on A, B, and C when all they need is just a few sessions with me. And they won't invest in sessions with me, but they will happily throw money down the toilet for the outcome from there. And it is so, so interesting to me that that is met with frustration, because that says to you all that you need to know for your messaging and marketing. There is something about the other thing that makes it look like it's the right answer for those people, and they're willing to invest in that. And when you share your thing, which you think solves the problem even better, they don't buy it. There's a messaging issue. And the key to resolving that messaging issue is in paying attention to and getting curious about where people are investing their money instead. So if you are getting frustrated or judgmental of your audience because they're spending money in the wrong spaces, again, instead of seeing that as insulting, see it as an opportunity for you to really nail your value proposition and address the messaging issue that means they're putting their money into something else other than the work that you are offering. The next one is, how very dare they? So how very dare they? And this one's a really interesting one because I see it pop up in a range of different ways. So I had a friend in a mastermind. She ran a free challenge. There were all these people in her pop-up group for her free challenge, and the challenge finished and people were saying, hey, the group's closing. We should all make our own group and keep supporting and sharing and helping each other. And this person was like, how very dare they? How dare they think that they can go off and work on this without me when I have put all of my time and energy into doing this with them in this free challenge. And if they wanted extra support and community, they could just buy my program and they would get everything that they need. But instead, they're going to go off and create their own splinter cell of things, of people working on this together for free. How dare they? It pops up in people who are working with someone, talking to each other, like forming networks with each other. Or I actually did a program once where we weren't allowed to talk to the other participants. And when a couple of people got busted who knew each other outside of the work that they'd done together, they were like, totally got busted. And it was like a how dare you, you're booted out, see you later. And so that judgment or that disdain for them was like, oh my gosh, that's so rude. How dare you, so rude, is an opportunity. Like, clearly people want to keep working with each other. They want to keep talking to each other. They want to keep working on this thing. They feel like there's more for them to do, but the group program or the paid thing or whatever's on offer is not the thing for them. They want something else. And people are allowed to get their needs met. And it's totally okay if you want to set the boundaries and say no splinter groups. Like, that's okay. That's your group, your rules, your program, your rules, your business, your rules. But don't judge people simply because they want to keep having that conversation. And I mean, if you can facilitate that conversation and keep them in your community to have that conversation, great. But if you're not interested in facilitating that conversation, then they're going to go and have that conversation elsewhere. That's totally legit of them to want to do that. So that's a really interesting one for me. And for me, it always creates this sense of, okay, well, how can I meet those needs without changing my boundaries? And there's always a creative solution that I can find. So yeah, that one's an interesting one. Like, if you find yourself feeling like, how dare they, about your audience or your clients as well, just pay attention to that one. And then the final one is if they can't see what they're doing, then that's their fault. If they can't see how valuable my work is, then I'm not there for them. If they can't prioritize investing in working with me, then I'm not interested in working with them. I don't want to help these people. And I see this in particular with in sales conversations. Like if they're not a quick decision maker and they're not willing to pay even the deposit straight away, then I don't want to work with them because they're not a quick decision maker. If they aren't willing to invest $6,000 in my program without talking to their partner, then they're not the kind of person that I want to work with because they're not independent. Those types of judgments. And to this, I always say, you just don't know what's going on for other people. How can you know? And is that really how you want to show up in the world? And I don't see this as much in the Heart Center community, but I do see this in the online business world a little bit, and particularly in places where it's like hard core pressure sales tactics in particular. But if you're in that mindset of if they can't see it or if they can't take action, then I don't want to have a conversation with them. I don't want to work with them, or I don't even want them to be in my audience. I see this a lot as well with like email marketing. If they're not willing to put up with 17 emails from me in a week when I'm launching something, then they can just F right off. I see that a lot. I think that this is a really big one in just paying attention to where you are shirking your responsibility in the process, right? If someone doesn't want to receive 17 emails from you in a week and that makes them want to unsubscribe from your list, is it actually they have to put up with it or else kind of scenario? Someone who I see does this really well is Denise Duffield-Thomas when she's doing an affiliate launch for a particular program. At the start of that affiliate launch, and in every other email that she sends about that affiliate launch, there's an option of like, if you don't want to hear about this person's program from me, unsubscribe from this launch. And that's a really beautiful thing to be able to do without saying, well, you have to listen to 17 emails about my launch, or you can just go away. That's your problem, right? It's almost like a combative approach to email marketing and a combative approach to business. And for your audience as well, sometimes they can't see the value of what you are offering, and it's not their job to find it. It is not their job to go on a treasure hunt and try and work out whether your product is the right fit for them or not. You have a shared responsibility. They need to show up and read some emails, or they need to show up and watch some videos, but you also need to make sure you're taking responsibility for providing enough information in that process that they can make that decision without having to jump through a bunch of hoops in order to find the information that they need. And similarly with if they can't decide in 24 hours type thing, you don't know what other people are going through. Like, even I do not invest in things more than $500 without talking about it with David. But the reason why I do that is because we are saving for a house right now, and we have some big priorities for our money, and we have some really big financial goals that we're going for. And so the process of talking it out with him is really helpful for me as an extrovert to just get really clear. What is it that I'm looking for? What am I trying to buy here? What is the outcome that I think I'll get from it? Will I actually put the time and energy in to get that result from it? And it's really helpful to me to have that conversation. I also know I'm very susceptible to NLP in the sales process and all of those trickery and tactics and things that make me end up having really big buyer's remorse. So I have a rule with myself that if I'm going to invest in anything in my business, I have to sleep on it for 48 hours. That's just the rule. And to say, well, I don't care if you have that rule. If you don't buy from me immediately, then you're not my kind of person. That is dripping with disdain, and it's full of judgment. And you don't know what is going on for that other person. And just because they have a different process of assessing whether something is the right fit for them doesn't mean that they don't deserve to be helped. And so that's a really big one for me. I think that in the online business world, there can be a tendency to be very dismissive of people who aren't excited and quick to jump in and willing to take everything that you say at face value and immediately trusting of you and all of those sorts of things. But to me, that's actually a really great quality that I love in my audience. And I love that people take time to consider whether they're going to work with me. And I love that people want to talk about it with their partners first, because they're going to go like fully into it if they do join. And I love giving people time and space to sleep on it because I love getting time and space to sleep on it. So, that's one where I've seen kind of a tendency for this judgment and this disdain to kind of creep in. And if that's coming up for you, it's something to consider. Now, with all of these things that we've talked about in this very long episode of the podcast, and thank you for sticking with me if you're still here, but with all of these things that have come up, my goal is not to say, don't feel them, don't think them, don't say them. Some of them, please don't say, but that's not the goal of this podcast episode. For me, the biggest shifts that happen are when I pay attention to my thoughts and I pay attention to the way that I'm contributing to the conversation in my industry. And so I wanted to do this episode through that lens. Think about all of these things we've talked about today. Your judgments about your industry, the disdain that you might have for parts of your industry or certain aspects of how your industry behaves, your disdain and judgment for your clients, potential clients, your audience, people who decide not to buy from you, people who decide that they're going to look for support in other ways than the way that you have prescribed. When you pay attention to how you think about these things and your contribution to your industry in this space and to the conversations about these things, that can shine a light on why we feel this way. And we get to make a conscious decision about whether we want to continue thinking that way, whether we want to continue behaving that way, and whether we want to continue showing up and contributing to the conversation in that way. So, in summary, I hope that you have found this interesting and insightful. I hope that you've found it valuable. And as I said at the start of the episode, I want this to be a conversation. So please come on over to the Heart-Centered Soul-Driven Entrepreneurs Facebook group. Use hashtag podcast aha. Tell me that you've been listening to episode number 238. And I'd love to know, where have you felt that you are dripping with disdain? Is it about your audience? Is it about your industry? Is there some judgment that you want to detox from the way that you show up online or the way that you feel about your business or your industry or your audience? And if you see other people contributing to this conversation, I would love for this to be a joint conversation, a group conversation, because I think there is so much that we can learn from these experiences, as well as so much that we can change about what we see online that we don't agree with. And I know that the Heart Center community is a beautiful incubator of new types of thinking for online business, new ways of showing up, much more feminine, connected, vulnerable, open, and integrity-driven practices in the online business world. And I am so, so grateful that I get to be part of that conversation, not just lead it, but also learn from it as well. So come on over to the Heart Center group. Let's continue the conversation. And until next time, thank you for listening to this episode of the Heart Center Business Podcast. And I cannot wait to see you shine. Bye. Would you like more tips, tools, and resources to help you grow your heart-centered business? Head to tashcorbin.com today.